as the king and queen leave the thrones and head for the exit of Westminster Abbey on the coronation Saturday, you'll see that everyone bows and curtsies to the king, and no one moves a limb, a muscle, when Camilla passes. And that was because they were angry with Camilla.
Camilla is caught red-handed targeting Catherine. Then King Charles shuts down Garter Parade. Okay, stay with me and take a look at this for a moment. According to the dramatic palace account at the center of this story, Queen Camilla was allegedly confronted after staff believed they had witnessed her directing an unsettling interaction toward Princess Catherine just before the Garter Parade. Catherine was reportedly left visibly distressed. Palace personnel stepped in, and the matter was taken straight to King Charles. What made this different was not simply the tension between two senior members of the royal family. It was the claim that the incident had happened so close to a major public ceremony that Charles was forced to consider stopping the event itself. Now, watch this carefully, because the moment Charles was briefed, the atmosphere reportedly changed. The Garter Parade was approaching, guests were gathering, ceremonial preparations were moving forward, and every second mattered. Yet instead of allowing the schedule to continue while aides quietly dealt with the disagreement, Charles reportedly demanded that officials establish exactly what had happened. The king was no longer dealing with palace gossip in isolation. He was facing an allegation involving Catherine, witnesses, conflicting explanations, and a ceremony that could soon place every royal movement in front of cameras. The alleged incident itself remained disputed. Camilla's representatives reportedly rejected the suggestion that she had deliberately targeted Catherine and maintained that what staff believed they had witnessed had been misunderstood. But that explanation did not immediately settle the matter. According to the account, Catherine's reaction had already attracted attention, and staff were concerned enough to separate the two women and alert senior officials. That single decision changed the situation completely. What might otherwise have remained a private disagreement suddenly became something senior palace figures believed required an answer before the procession could proceed. And this is where the story becomes difficult to ignore. Hi viewers, if Catherine was standing in that position and you believed someone was deliberately trying to make her uncomfortable, would you stay silent or speak up? Leave a simple comment saying, "I would speak up," if you believe she deserved to be protected in that moment. Because every time people see something they believe is wrong and simply scroll past it, the person at the center of the controversy is left standing alone. A like, a share, or a subscription may seem small, but for viewers who believe Catherine should not be pushed aside, it is a simple way of making their position known. Then came the question nobody around the ceremony could answer quickly. What exactly had happened between Camilla and Catherine? The first accounts were not identical. Some palace personnel reportedly believed the interaction had been deliberate. Others were more cautious, aware that a tense moment inside the royal household could easily be interpreted differently depending on who witnessed it.
This, of course, came as a huge shock, and William and I have been doing everything we can to process and manage this privately for the sake of our young family. As you can imagine, this has taken time.
Catherine herself had not created a public scene. She had not turned the moment into a spectacle. Yet the concern surrounding her reaction was enough to make staff act. That detail mattered. In a palace where appearances carry enormous weight, even a brief exchange can become significant when the people involved are senior members of the royal family. A look can be noticed, a movement can be interpreted, a change in position can raise questions. And when the cameras are about to turn toward a ceremonial procession, the margin for error becomes almost non-existent. Charles understood that. According to the account, he did not want assumptions passed from one aide to another until rumor became accepted as fact. He wanted the sequence examined. Who was present? What had been said? What had happened immediately before Catherine became distressed? Why had staff intervened? And most importantly, was there any reason to believe that the interaction had been intentionally directed at her? Those questions transformed the mood behind the scenes. The palace was no longer preparing only for a parade. Officials were suddenly trying to determine whether a family dispute had entered the machinery of an official royal occasion. And there was another problem. Time was running out. The closer the Garter Parade came, the harder it would become to quietly resolve anything. Once the procession began, cameras would capture every movement. Guests would watch the royal family take their positions. A single confrontation could become the defining image of the entire ceremony. That was the possibility Charles reportedly wanted to prevent. He had a choice. He could allow the event to continue and hope the tension disappeared beneath ceremony, uniforms, music, and protocol. Or he could intervene before the first major public moment and risk creating an even bigger spectacle by doing so. Then the reports reached him again. This time, the concern was not presented as a vague complaint from one person. The accounts reportedly included observations from staff, the sequence of events surrounding Catherine, and the competing explanation coming from Camilla's side. Charles now had to decide whether the alleged targeting was simply a misunderstanding or something more deliberate. And that decision was about to become visible to everyone. Because according to the dramatic account, the king did not simply ask for another private conversation, he prepared to take control of the ceremony itself. The significance of that moment cannot be overstated. A Garter Parade is designed around order, positions are planned, movements are rehearsed. The public sees confidence and tradition, not uncertainty. If Charles stopped it, even briefly, everyone would know that something serious had happened behind the scenes. Catherine had already been placed at the center of the controversy. Camilla was facing an allegation her representatives denied. Senior aides were caught between conflicting accounts. And Charles was running out of time. And there was one detail that made the timing even more troubling. The concern had not appeared after the parade had gone wrong. It had appeared before the public ever saw anything. That meant the people responsible for keeping the ceremony orderly were already watching the situation while the royal family was still preparing to step into view. The alleged targeting, the distressed reaction, the conflicting explanations, and the approaching cameras.
My life will of course change as I take up my new responsibilities. It will no longer be possible for me to give so much of my time and energies.
Had collided at precisely the wrong moment. Charles was therefore not simply choosing between two relatives. He was choosing whether to trust the existing explanation or stop everything until he knew the truth. That choice was now seconds away. Then, just as the procession was preparing to move, the king reportedly made the decision that would change the entire story. He raised his hand. The movement of the procession stopped. For a moment, the ceremony that was supposed to project unity became completely still. And the question hanging over Windsor was no longer whether there had been tension between Camilla and Catherine. It was whether Charles had just decided that protecting the integrity of the ceremony mattered more than allowing the royal family to keep moving as though nothing had happened. If that question has you wondering what Charles was told behind closed doors, stay with this story and do not look away, because the next part reveals what palace staff reportedly placed before him and why the situation became even more serious. 12 days earlier, the first warning did not come from a royal argument. It came from the rehearsal floor. Inside St. George's Hall, preparations for the Garter Parade were being checked with the precision expected of a major royal occasion. Palace personnel were studying positions, entrances, camera coverage, and the movement of the royal party. Nothing about the rehearsal was supposed to be controversial. Then Camilla arrived, and according to the accounts surrounding this story, her attention settled on one particular detail, where Catherine would stand when the cameras turned toward the procession. That detail became important because the proposed arrangement reportedly placed Catherine farther from the main visual focus. Positions change. Camera angles are adjusted. Royal events are rehearsed repeatedly. But the account claims that Camilla wanted Catherine's visibility reduced, and that the instruction caused immediate discomfort among people working on the preparations. The tension sharpened when William became aware of the proposed positioning. He reportedly challenged the arrangement and made it clear that Catherine should not be pushed away from him during the public appearance. Palace personnel were caught between competing expectations. The disagreement itself was enough. What made the rehearsal significant was what allegedly happened after that challenge. Instead of ending the disagreement there, the account suggests that resentment continued behind the scenes.
This is the love, support and kindness that has been shown by so many of you. It means so much to us both. We hope that you'll understand that as a family, we now need some time, space and privacy.
Camilla reportedly remained unhappy with the arrangement, while William became increasingly alert to the possibility that another attempt could be made to alter Catherine's position later. That made how the following days were viewed. The palace was preparing for a ceremony built around tradition. That made every new instruction harder to dismiss, because staff were already watching for another unexpected change again. Any adjustment that appeared insignificant inside a rehearsal room could become a very different matter once cameras were broadcasting live. For Catherine, the issue was not simply where she would stand. The deeper concern was whether someone was deliberately using ceremony to control how she appeared beside William. That question was never publicly settled in the account. It remained an allegation, and Camilla's side disputed the interpretation. But the suspicion itself created a new layer of tension. Staff reportedly began paying closer attention to instructions concerning the procession. They were not simply watching the royals. They were watching the paperwork, the sequence of movements, and the people responsible for communicating changes. That is where the story moved from personal tension into palace procedure. A senior ceremonial official reportedly became aware that different expectations were circulating. One set of instructions reflected the established arrangement. Another appeared to anticipate changes. Nobody wanted to accuse a senior royal without certainty, but nobody wanted to ignore a potential problem either. The pressure increased as the parade approached. Behind the public image of polished uniforms and royal tradition, staff were reportedly dealing with a question that had no easy answer. If an alteration was requested, was it genuinely ceremonial? If Catherine's position changed, who had authorized it? And if the change appeared designed to separate her from William, was that coincidence or intent? The Garter Parade was not an ordinary family gathering. It was a public institution wrapped around a royal tradition. Any visible disagreement could become the story instead of the ceremony itself. William's reaction during the rehearsal also mattered for another reason. He had reportedly made his position unmistakable. Catherine was not to be treated as an afterthought in a public event involving both of them. That confrontation gave the later allegations a context that staff could not simply dismiss as an isolated misunderstanding. Then came the most revealing stage of the preparation. People around the ceremony reportedly began noticing how carefully Catherine's movements were being watched. The account describes attention to where she would enter, pause, and stand beside William. None of those details proves malicious intent, yet together they created a pattern that made some personnel uneasy. And once people became uneasy, they started asking a different question. Who was actually controlling the final arrangement? That question reached beyond Camilla and Catherine. It involved aides, ceremonial planners, security personnel, and senior household officials. The more people involved, the harder it became to keep a disagreement contained. There was another complication. The royal household could not simply change a formal arrangement because two family members disagreed. Protocol existed for a reason. instructions had to move through the appropriate channels. A last-minute change could create confusion, especially when television crews and international guests were already preparing for the event. So when the alleged targeting incident eventually emerged, it did not appear in a vacuum. There had already been tension over positioning. There had already been concern about Catherine's visibility. There had already been a disagreement involving William. And there was already an awareness among some staff that the ceremonial arrangement could become a flashpoint. That is why the later report about Catherine being distressed carried more weight than a single uncomfortable exchange might normally receive. The people around the ceremony were not hearing the allegation without context. They were hearing it after days of concern. And yet, one question remained unanswered. If Camilla truly intended nothing beyond ordinary ceremonial coordination, why had the atmosphere become so tense around Catherine's position in the first place? The answer could have been simple: miscommunication, competing instructions, an innocent adjustment that was interpreted badly. Or it could have pointed to something more deliberate. No one could know without examining what happened next. That is why the staff reports became so important. They could establish the sequence. They could show who was present. They could reveal whether the disputed interaction happened spontaneously or followed a specific instruction. And this was the point where the story moved beyond palace whispers. Because the next development reportedly involved the very people responsible for keeping the ceremony under control. They began comparing what they had been told with what they had actually witnessed. One account did not fit neatly with another. A timing detail raised questions. A movement that looked insignificant suddenly appeared important. And the closer officials looked, the harder it became to dismiss the entire situation as simple family friction. For Catherine, the pressure was now personal. For William, it was becoming a matter of protecting his wife from what he believed could become a deliberate public slight. For Camilla, the allegations threatened to turn a ceremonial disagreement into a much larger confrontation. And for Charles, the stakes were about to change completely. Because once the competing accounts reached the highest level of the household, the issue was no longer whether everyone could simply move on. It became a question of evidence. Who saw what? Who gave which instruction? And who stood to benefit if Catherine was moved away from the position originally expected? Those questions were still unanswered when the next report arrived. It concerned the moment Catherine had allegedly been targeted. And unlike the earlier rehearsal dispute, this time there were people nearby who believed they had seen enough to raise the alarm. If that detail sounds serious, stay with the story, because the next part gets worse, and the evidence surrounding Catherine's reaction reportedly changed everything. The warning reached the ceremonial team before Catherine had even left the area. One member of staff reportedly noticed the change in atmosphere and immediately alerted another official. Catherine had appeared uncomfortable after an interaction involving Camilla, and the staff member believed the matter was serious enough to warrant intervention. Nobody knew yet whether they were witnessing a deliberate slight, a misunderstanding, or an awkward exchange that had been made worse by the pressure of the approaching ceremony. What happened next reportedly made the situation harder to dismiss. According to the account, personnel moved to create distance between the two women. Catherine was taken away from the immediate situation while officials tried to establish what had happened. The decision was not made for the cameras. It happened before the public had any reason to suspect that something was wrong. That distinction mattered. Staff were forced to reconstruct the moment from what they had seen and heard. Every detail became important. Who had approached whom? What had been said? And why had Catherine's reaction been strong enough for staff to intervene? Those questions began circulating among the people responsible for the ceremony. Camilla's representatives reportedly rejected the suggestion that she had deliberately targeted Catherine. Their position was that the interaction had been misunderstood. From that perspective, the incident was being given a meaning it did not have. But the staff involved were not looking at the situation through the same lens. They had seen Catherine's reaction. They had seen the intervention, and they had to decide whether the concern was serious enough to reach senior officials. The concern reached senior officials. The palace atmosphere tightened immediately. There was no room for casual assumptions anymore. A complaint involving Catherine during preparations for a major royal ceremony could not simply be brushed aside. The timing made the allegation sensitive. The Garter Parade was approaching. Every minute brought the royal family closer to a public appearance that would be watched closely. If the dispute remained unresolved, there was a risk that another confrontation could occur once the procession began. That possibility forced officials to look backward. They reportedly compared the sequence of events leading up to the interaction with the arrangements already discussed during preparations. They wanted to know whether the encounter had appeared without warning or whether something had changed immediately beforehand. This was where the story developed its first serious contradiction. The account suggests that the explanation offered by Camilla's side did not completely match what some staff believed they had observed. That did not prove deliberate targeting, but it meant the matter could no longer be settled by accepting one explanation. Aides reportedly began collecting witness accounts. Different people remembered different details, but certain points appeared to overlap. Catherine had been involved. Camilla had been present. Staff had noticed something unusual. Catherine had appeared distressed. Personnel had intervened. The disagreement centered on intention. That was the difficult part. Nobody could look at an expression, a movement, or a brief exchange and automatically know what another person had intended. Yet in a royal household where protocol governs almost every public movement, intention was not the only issue. Impact mattered too. If an interaction had left Catherine distressed immediately before a major ceremony, senior officials had to consider whether allowing the situation to continue would create a larger problem, and that concern reportedly reached Charles. The king was not being asked to settle a family argument over dinner. He was being presented with a situation involving a formal royal event, competing accounts, and a member of the family who had reportedly become visibly uncomfortable. Charles asked for clarity, find out exactly what happened. That command changed the investigation. Officials could no longer rely on informal conversations. They had to examine the sequence carefully. Schedules were reviewed. Staff movements were considered. Security information was reportedly checked. The goal was to understand the interaction. Then one detail began to attract attention. The timing. The alleged incident had occurred close enough to the ceremony that any deliberate attempt to alter Catherine's position or unsettle her would have had an immediate effect on the public event. That did not establish a plot. It raised the stakes. And the more officials examined the timing, the more important the earlier preparation disputes became. The rehearsal concerns were no longer being viewed as a separate matter. They provided context for why staff were taking the new allegations seriously. The story shifted from suspicion to scrutiny. Catherine was not being treated as someone who had simply had an uncomfortable encounter. Camilla was not being treated as someone who could simply dismiss the concern. Charles was no longer simply deciding which relative he believed. He was now the person responsible for deciding whether the royal event could safely proceed while the dispute remained unresolved. That responsibility carried a difficult choice. Stopping the ceremony would create a tension. Continuing it could create an even bigger problem. If the allegation was wrong, a shutdown could make a misunderstanding appear far more serious than it was. If the allegation was right, allowing the procession to continue could place Catherine in another vulnerable position before cameras and guests. Charles needed more than emotion. He needed a sequence. He needed to know what happened before the interaction, what happened during it, and what happened immediately afterward. And that was when another account reportedly reached the officials. It did not simply describe Catherine's reaction. It reportedly challenged the explanation that the incident had been accidental. The new information suggested that what happened immediately before the confrontation could change everything that followed. That detail was enough to force another review. Officials were no longer asking only what Camilla had done. They were asking whether someone had anticipated the situation. The distinction mattered. An accidental encounter could be resolved quietly. A deliberate act would require a completely different response. And there was still one piece missing. Catherine had not publicly explained the incident. The palace had issued no account. Camilla's representatives had disputed the interpretation. So the officials were left with witness observations, timing, ceremonial arrangements, and Catherine's visible reaction. That raised concern, but did not end the question. Then Charles received the information that reportedly changed his calculation. The evidence did not arrive as a confession, it came as a sequence. One detail connected to another. The earlier rehearsal dispute. The disputed interaction, the staff intervention, the timing, and the approaching procession. Suddenly, the possibility that this was merely an unfortunate misunderstanding became harder for some officials to accept. Charles now had to decide whether the royal household could continue as planned, and his answer was about to be seen by everyone. Before that decision was made, however, one final question had to be answered. If Catherine had truly been targeted, what exactly had the alleged targeting been designed to achieve? That answer would determine whether the Garter Parade could continue at all. If this situation matters to you, do not just watch and move on. Like, share, and subscribe if you believe Catherine's side deserves to be heard, because the next part exposes what Charles reportedly discovered when the accounts were placed side by side, and that is where this palace dispute becomes far more serious. Charles did not answer immediately. The room had gone quiet around him. The reports were on the table, the ceremony was approaching, and the decision in front of him carried a risk either way. If he allowed the procession to continue, the unresolved dispute could erupt in public. If he stopped it, the very act of stopping would tell everyone that something serious had happened. He chose neither accusation nor denial. He chose verification alone. Officials were reportedly instructed to compare the witness accounts against the timing of the ceremony and the arrangements already in place. The purpose was simple. Charles needed to know whether the alleged targeting of Catherine could be connected to anything that had been planned beforehand. That review changed the character of the situation. The earlier concerns about positioning were placed beside the later interaction. The staff intervention was examined against the timing. The explanation from Camilla's representatives was considered alongside the accounts from personnel who had witnessed the encounter. No single detail proved intention. Together, however, the details created a problem that Charles could not simply ignore. The king reportedly focused on one question. Was Catherine being placed at a disadvantage because of a genuine ceremonial decision, or had the ceremony itself become part of a personal dispute? If the first possibility was true, the situation could be corrected quietly. But if the second was true, continuing could allow the same conflict to unfold in front of the public. Charles reportedly understood what the cameras would do. They would not capture the private explanations. They would capture the movement. They would capture Catherine's reaction. They would capture Camilla standing beside the royal family. And they would capture every moment if the disagreement resurfaced. That meant the palace could not rely on a private explanation once the procession began. The pressure increased. Senior aides reportedly continued reviewing the available information, while ceremonial personnel waited for direction. The longer the decision took, the closer the royal family moved toward the point when there would be no easy opportunity to reverse course. Then Charles reportedly asked for the original ceremonial arrangements. The document mattered because it could establish what had been expected before the dispute. Officials compared the established positions with the concerns raised during the preparations. The review was not presented as proof of wrongdoing. It was a way to determine whether the disputed interaction had any connection to an earlier disagreement. The comparison reportedly raised another concern. The issue surrounding Catherine's position had not appeared for the first time on the day of the alleged incident. There had already been tension. There had already been disagreement. And now there was a fresh complaint involving Catherine just before the ceremony. Meanwhile, Catherine remained away from the immediate tension. She had become the person at the center of the dispute without appearing to seek it. The longer the officials investigated, the clearer it became that the next public movement of the royal family could carry far more meaning than anyone had expected. William reportedly remained close to her. He did not need to make a public statement. His position had already been established during the earlier dispute. Catherine was not going to be left isolated while the palace decided what to do. That created another pressure point. If the procession continued with the same arrangements, the unresolved disagreement could become visible. If Charles changed the arrangements, questions would follow. If he stopped the procession entirely, the questions would become impossible to avoid. The king therefore faced a choice between three bad outcomes. But the reports suggested he was becoming less concerned about avoiding attention and more concerned about controlling the situation before it became worse. Then came the decision. Charles reportedly ordered the ceremonial operation to pause. The instruction moved through officials responsible for the procession. For the first time, the palace was no longer preparing for the event. It was holding it. The order was described as a precaution while officials established what had happened and how the royal party should proceed. But the effect was immediate. People waiting for the procession noticed the delay. Staff began moving with greater urgency. The atmosphere around the ceremony changed. The question was no longer whether there had been tension. Everyone could now sense that something had interrupted the expected sequence. And Camilla reportedly understood that the situation had moved beyond a private disagreement. The king had intervened. The ceremony had been paused. Catherine had been protected from further escalation. Whatever explanation Camilla's representatives had offered, Charles was not prepared to allow the uncertainty to continue unchecked. Charles had not publicly declared anyone guilty. A royal procession depends on order. If the people taking part cannot trust the arrangements around them, the ceremony loses control. Charles reportedly wanted control restored before the public saw something worse. And then the moment everyone had been trying to avoid arrived. The procession began to move again under intense attention. But the atmosphere was no longer normal. Catherine knew that officials had intervened. William knew that the matter had reached his father. Camilla knew that the king had stopped the event because of concerns surrounding the situation. And Charles knew that one more unexpected move could turn the entire ceremony into a public confrontation. The next moments carried enormous pressure. Every position mattered. Every movement mattered. Every glance could be interpreted. The cameras were ready. The public was watching. And the royal family had to move forward as though nothing had happened, even though everyone closest to the dispute knew that everything had changed. Then Camilla reportedly made a move that brought the entire controversy back into focus. According to the account, she approached the formation in a way that staff believed risked recreating the very problem Charles had just tried to prevent. Catherine was suddenly placed in another tense moment. William reacted. Officials watched. Charles saw the situation developing. This time, there was no room for another quiet warning. The king reportedly raised his hand. The procession stopped. For the people watching, it was a startling interruption. For those who knew the background, it was the consequence of a problem building long before the public noticed. Charles directed the royal party back into the established arrangement. The message was clear without requiring a dramatic speech. No member of the family would be permitted to turn the ceremonial formation into a battlefield. Camilla's representatives could dispute the interpretation. The witnesses could disagree over intention. But Charles had made his priority unmistakable. The ceremony would proceed only under controlled conditions. And that decision created a new question. What would happen once the cameras stopped? Because public protocol could restore the formation, it could not settle the dispute. Behind closed doors, Charles would still have to confront the conflicting accounts, Catherine's distress, the earlier disagreements, and the question that had started everything. Was this really a misunderstanding, or had the palace just witnessed something deliberate? The answer was waiting inside the private room where the key people would finally have to face one another. And if the king had already stopped the Garter Parade once, nobody could be certain what he would do after hearing the full explanation. The doors closed, and the royal family was finally away from the cameras. What happened inside that room mattered more than the interruption itself. The public had seen a halted procession. The people inside the palace now had to confront the reason behind it. According to the account, Charles wanted each version placed on the table without interruption. Staff explained what they had witnessed. Catherine was given space to describe why the interaction had left her distressed. Camilla's representatives maintained that the interpretation of her actions was wrong. That disagreement remained at the center of everything. Charles reportedly did not treat the allegation as proven fact. Instead, he focused on whether the sequence of events could reasonably be explained as an innocent misunderstanding. The earlier concerns surrounding Catherine's position were considered alongside the latest incident. The question was no longer simply whether Camilla and Catherine had clashed. It was whether the pattern had become serious enough to threaten the dignity of a major royal ceremony. Catherine's position was important. She had not publicly accused Camilla. She had not turned the disagreement into a spectacle. Yet staff had noticed her reaction and believed intervention was necessary. That left Charles facing a difficult reality. Even if intentions could not be established with certainty, the situation had already created consequences. The family could not simply pretend nothing had happened. William reportedly remained firm in his support for Catherine. He understood that any further dispute could draw attention toward her when the purpose of the ceremony was supposed to be completely different. His concern was not only personal. A public confrontation involving senior royals could overshadow the event and create another round of speculation. Charles therefore focused on preventing another incident. The decision reportedly centered on the immediate ceremony rather than a dramatic punishment. The priority was to restore order, protect the participants, and make clear that royal protocol could not be used to intensify a private dispute. That distinction changed the ending. The account did not need a spectacular royal decree to create consequences. The king's decision to intervene had already sent a message. When a disagreement threatens an official event, the ceremony comes first. Camilla was reportedly left facing the reality that her actions, whether intentional or misunderstood, had created a situation that could no longer be controlled through private explanations alone. That was the real damage. The controversy had moved beyond two women having a difficult relationship. It had reached staff, it had reached William, it had reached Charles, and eventually, it had affected the ceremony itself. For Catherine, the outcome was different. She had been at the center of an uncomfortable situation, but she had not allowed the moment to define her. She remained composed while the palace worked through the dispute. Her position beside William became more significant because it represented something the confrontation could not easily break. The final decision also gave Charles a way to draw a boundary without turning the disagreement into an even larger public spectacle. The message was straightforward. No royal title would place anyone above ceremonial discipline. No personal grievance should determine another person's place, and no disagreement should be allowed to turn an important royal occasion into a public battle. That message carried weight because of what had happened earlier. The Garter Parade had been stopped. Not because the ceremony itself had failed, but because the people responsible for it believed the situation around the royal family had become too uncertain to ignore. And that is why the alleged targeting of Catherine became so significant. The controversy was never only about one interaction. It was about whether someone had attempted to influence Catherine's position, whether staff had correctly understood what they witnessed, and whether Charles had been right to intervene before the disagreement became even more visible. Camilla's representatives continued to dispute the allegation. That matters. There was no public finding establishing deliberate targeting from the account itself. The story remains built around reported observations, disputed interpretations, and palace tension. But the uncertainty did not make the confrontation less compelling. It made the central question harder. What would have happened if Charles had done nothing? Would the ceremony have continued without another incident? Would Catherine have faced another uncomfortable moment in front of cameras? Or would the entire situation have disappeared quietly behind the walls of the palace? Nobody can know. What can be understood from the account is that Charles reportedly decided he could not take that risk. He chose intervention. He chose control. And he chose to prevent the disagreement from dictating what the public would see. That decision also changed the relationship between the people involved, at least within the story being told. Catherine emerged with the reassurance that the king had taken the concern seriously. William's position beside her remained firm. Camilla was left with the consequences of a controversy that had grown far beyond what a private disagreement might normally produce. The most striking part was not the raised hand that stopped the procession. It was what that gesture represented. For a brief moment, ceremony gave way to accountability. The royal family could not hide behind schedules, titles, or tradition when a situation involving Catherine had become serious enough to disturb an official event. And perhaps that is the question viewers should remember after the story ends. Was Charles right to stop the Garter Parade before he had every answer? Some will argue that he protected Catherine and prevented a larger public confrontation. Others may believe he allowed a private dispute to become unnecessarily serious. Camilla's supporters may insist that her actions were misunderstood. Those who sympathize with Catherine may see the king's intervention as a necessary line in the sand. Either way, the controversy leaves one uncomfortable lesson. Inside a royal institution built on control, appearances can become evidence of something deeper. A single interaction can create questions. A disputed decision can create suspicion. And once cameras are waiting, even a private disagreement can become impossible to contain. That is why this story does not end with the parade. It ends with the question of what happens next. Because if the allegations surrounding Catherine were only the beginning, the next confrontation could be far more damaging. And if the palace has learned anything from this episode, it is that the most dangerous royal disputes are not always the loudest ones. Sometimes the real battle begins with a small change, a disputed instruction, or a moment that only a few people notice. Then the cameras arrive. The audience watches. And suddenly, everyone wants to know who knew what, who acted first, and who will finally answer for it. If you believe Catherine deserves to be heard rather than pushed into silence, do not simply watch this story and walk away. Like it, share it, subscribe to this channel, and turn on notifications. Let your support show that people are paying attention when powerful figures are accused of crossing a line. The questions left behind may prove more explosive than the confrontation itself. And stay with this channel, because the next royal story coming here is about to get worse, more revealing, and far more difficult to ignore.